In the culture war, there are no winners, just podcasters. Only a few are willing to risk their lives in the face of some of the dumbest ideas to have ever captured human civilization. Every week, we, Megan Daum and Sarah Hayter, humbly accept this mission to bring you conversations that are equal parts stunning, brave, and morally inequivalent. Did we say that one already?
Maybe.
Okay, but I think so. That's an evergreen. Doesn't matter if we said it. We're definitely morally.
I know we struggled over that word.
Inequivalent, unequivocal.
Yeah,
we're more unequivocal and inequivalent do not mean the same things. But I think you and I are morally not equals, because I think you're probably more moral than I am, but in a immoral way.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Deep. I agree.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about our recent visit with Rebecca Traister. And we're going to touch on some other things as well. But how are you doing? Rebecca Traister, very accomplished journalist, author, feminist writer, paid us a visit, which I was really glad that she came.
Yeah. It was nice to have her. She's obviously a very smart woman. And I've actually read 2 of her 3 books.
Mm-hmm.
And I went and picked up the one that was relevant to our conversation about single women.
All the single ladies.
And I mean, that book is packed with statistics and data, and like every page has so much information on it. And it's quite impressive, actually. And I listened to a podcast that she was on, and she talked about how long it took her to write that book, like 5 years or something. Like it was a feat. And I believe it. You know, I as I was reading through that book, it definitely felt like there was a lot of information that she just wanted to convey. I do, of course, disagree with like maybe all of it, like much of it. And I wonder if it's, because it's not a data problem. She has data, but it's also perspective and what we're assuming from the start. And I held back in our conversation, and I hope everybody noticed. I hope you noticed, because that was very brave of me.
It was.
It was big of me, because I definitely, there was a lot that she shot out there, and I wanted to disagree with every single point. But then I thought, I'm not going to punish somebody who was gracious enough to come on my podcast by torturing her the whole time and arguing with her.
It's hard to know what to do. Yeah, right. Yeah. We wouldn't want to turn it into a debate.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't like it that you had to hold back. I don't know. Maybe if we had more time. I mean, she was, I didn't want to keep her more than an hour. She did stay longer. I mean,
she is doing us a favor. It's one of the. I don't know what to do, because she's doing us a favor. She's coming on our podcast that has like all 10 listeners, and they're amazing, and we love you guys. But
I know
you're just not big enough to warrant a guest appearance by a lot of people. So when they're doing it, they're really just doing us a favor, and it's really nice of them. It would be totally different if it was a debate sponsored by somebody else. Like Barry Weiss has a debate with me and Rebecca Traister. Well, I'm gonna, bring the guns, but it's a totally different situation.
I know. Isn't it? It's really hard to know what to do. I've actually been sometimes criticized on my other podcast for bringing people in and not pushing back enough.
Yeah, but where do you?
I'm kind of like, well, like there, especially if it's a big get. Like I'm not gonna, bring somebody in and then punish them. Exactly, like beat them up on the show.
Yeah, I think you have to walk a line. I think this is hard also for people who don't listen to who don't actually produce their own podcast to understand like the power dynamics kind of happening in the back end. You can't have people on and just punish them, and if you do that, then no one's going to come on your podcast again.
Right.
So I thought you have to. Yeah, I thought we pushed back. We did push back, but it wasn't like I didn't say anything I that wasn't true, but I also just didn't say a bunch of things that could have, I think, derailed the conversation
Okay.
very early on, and then
All
she
right.
wouldn't have gotten past the first point that she made, because I would have just,
Right.
you know, I think that I remember listening to like a Sam Harris conversation with Jordan Peterson a long time ago, and it got stuck on one point. I think it got stuck on like what truth is or something like that, and they never left, and they were just arguing about it for like 40 minutes. And I remember people listening to it hated it. I liked it. I loved it. That was great for me. But for everybody else, it was like, just move on, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well, I thought, I had a lot of thoughts about the conversation, and I was thinking a lot about how being a journalist and being like a writer or a cultural critic, it's a different job than being a social scientist or like even a philosopher. And the job is to kind of look at what's going on in the culture right now and apply some kind of larger analysis using historical precedent and data. And you do have a historical perspective, but you are ultimately talking about what's going on now. Like if you are a magazine writer, and it's good to be a magazine writer, right? Like if you are a writer, you want to be a magazine writer, not a newspaper writer usually, because that's where you can really like write longer pieces, and there's like a sense of style, and it's just a more satisfying experience artistically, and even intellectually. So I think that the job of Rebecca's job, and this is my job too, and has been my job for a long time, is to sort of like look at a phenomenon and then put a particular spin on it that is relevant to the current moment. So I think that when a lot of what she's talking about applies to the last several decades, and your perspective would go much farther back. So I think it may, in some ways, it may just kind of be like a clash of missions. So maybe we should go through and if there's a couple of points, you can debate with her now that she's not here.
Now
I mean,
that she's not,
what is this?
It seems so shitty to do that.
I don't. But
like,
I'll represent her. I'll be her.
Well, okay. So I think that's interesting what you said, the difference in missions, because I don't know what my mission is. I'm an actual activist. You know what I mean? Like
I thought you weren't an wait,
not
make
anymore,
up your mind.
Not
I
much
thought
of
you were
not an activist anymore, but that's what I actually did, And I think it was very confusing to me, the role of like what you're describing as this magazine writer, because to me sometimes they acted like activists and they were dishonest in a way that really is not, it's never really forgivable, but it's something that you can see an activist do because they're so mission oriented, goal oriented. Like, I just have to win no matter what. And so this is the kind of thing that made me disgusted. This is the kind of thing that made me hate activism. And then to see writers engaging in that kind of similar, like myopic worldview, really made me sick. And I guess this is why I struggle with calling myself a writer, even if that's the closest thing to a job description at the moment, because I don't know what that means. It's like, is that still activist but lying about it?
Yeah, it's
like
this podcast space, it's so interesting because it's like a hybrid between these two things. I mean, you have like the kind of people, sort of social scientists, you can bring in like some hardcore evo psych person. I don't mean a bullshit evo psych person, I mean a real one. And then you can also bring in like people with a more creative, I don't want to say, I'm wary of saying creative in the context of journalism, so let me revise that a little bit. But you could bring in somebody to kind of like tell the hard truths in like just raw terms, and then you could bring in somebody whose job it is to kind of put it in a framework that is interesting and relevant. But like, it's only, the podcast space has like melded these two things, and I think we're sort of trying to figure out how to metabolize it still. Not we personally, but just the creators in this space.
But I wonder if you can do that job well without having a very broad understanding of like human affairs that I I feel as if many cultural commentators simply don't have. I mean, they are talking about what you were saying, like the past couple of decades, and they're framing everything from the perspective of, working women in the past couple of decades. Even with, I think Rebecca tries to pull it back, and well, I mean, she does pull it back in her book, All the Single Ladies. She like goes back to like early 1900s. I mean, I forget, maybe further back than that, but she tries to really paint a broad picture of working women. But I think that you actually have to go broader than that. Like even that is the modern world. That is a world in which we started decoupling manual labor, like physicality, from what you can do, from the work itself. And we started developing all these professions that women could really take a part in equally. But beyond that, we also started, we have this prosperity that allowed us to think about life without children. We didn't need 10 of them to survive. Many of them were surviving anyway. And then we needed fewer and fewer to help us get by, and maybe none at all. You didn't need to have kids, and you can have a retirement and survive. So the things were like, there was a fundamental, like, the tectonic plates or whatever, like of culture are shifting, and those aspects of culture, it is just simply not being addressed if you're not looking further than the last century or even 2 centuries. It has to be broader than that. Do you know what I mean? Like, or is that, am I asking for too much, and no one can do this or won't do this?
I mean, I also think that we have to talk about like the biological aspects. Like the fact is that people are, the biological reality is that it's better to have kids younger than older. I was just reading something, who was it? There was a famous quote from oh my gosh, it's like it may even be like one of the sort of early like Greek philosophers, that the ideal age for a lady to get married is 18, and a man is the way that was phrased was like 30 and 7, basically 37 and 18 was yes, this was some
no, oh god,
this goes like way back, and like
okay, you need to cancel him.
I know. Well, I think this person is dead. I mean, it's literally somebody like,
you can cancel people
like Aristotle or something. But
okay,
and the idea too was like that the maturity level was about even at 18 and 37, what? And also like the decline that men would somehow they would decline at the same time. I don't even know what the rationale
that's
was,
wishful thinking. I feel like with a lot of these older, like middle-aged men, they're like, actually, I'm at the peak.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no, you're not.
I think it was Al Pacino that said it, right? Al Pacino, he's like 92, and he just had a baby.
Aristotle. You thought maybe it was Aristotle.
I think
it turns out it was Al Pacino.
Whatever, potato. Anyway, so but I do feel like we are now having to like reckon with the way that we have disrupted nature and biological processes through contraception and various kinds of technologies, everything from embryo freezing to artificial wombs, and that's very recent.
It's all changed so much. Right. I mean, so much of the landscape that has shifted. But that landscape contributed to why things were the way they were back in the bad old days. And I don't see enough of a recognition, or maybe even like an understanding of that in the feminist spaces. I would say even the more intellectual feminist spaces, I feel like that's missing. When I see a historical analysis, it's some garbage, like nonsense about how we used to be, matriarchal or much more egalitarian, even if not matriarchal, and the Industrial Revolution, or maybe they go further and then they say the really was when we became sedentary. Before, when we were hunter-gatherers, things were much more egalitarian, and then we got into horticulture and everything shifted. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think they know that that's accurate or not accurate. I don't think it matters to them that it comports with what we know about history. And it's also, prehistory is a very difficult thing to know anything about. I wouldn't be surprised if in 100 years everything we thought we knew about prehistory was actually wrong, because a lot of what we're doing is interpreting. There is no writing, so we're interpreting based on a Voss and burial sites and locations, and we're presuming that if you're located here, it means you're powerful or not powerful or whatever. And these are all assumptions that we're making from our own cultural context. It's very hard to get this right. It's very hard to know anything about prehistory that is truly, is something you can stand on and base a worldview on. Come on, like, absurd, really. But
it was Aristotle, by the way.
It was it?
I just looked it up. Yeah,
Aristotle
said it should be
repeated it.
18 and 35. That's what he said. So,
okay. Well, my apologies. Turns out,
too bad. If we can get him on,
well, where did Al Pacino come from?
Because he was quoting.
Okay.
Yeah, no, Al Pacino's done him one better. Al Pacino just had a child. Yeah. I've got thoughts about that.
That's disgusting. Disgusting. Okay. We can't talk about it. It's gross.
Well, anyway, so okay.
But I think that just like the intellectual, honestly, I don't want to say childishness, but there's just a lack of significant thought put into a lot of how we ended up where we ended up, why the quote unquote patriarchy was a thing. This is why I have a frustration with that term feminist, and why I feel very alienated from it. And I don't really want to put a lot of labels on myself anymore, period, because I do think that is something that impacts you intellectually, whether you want it to or not, even if you're a very objective person. And you're somebody who likes, is very good at dispassionate rationalizing of things. But it's, but really when you put a label, now you have a team, you put a label on yourself, you can't help but be biased towards them. So for that reason, I don't want to call myself a feminist. But then there's an additional reason that even if that wasn't the case, I don't know if it applies to me. I don't know what that word means anymore. There's like, you will say feminism means this, or it meant something in my day. People in the comments were talking about it. I was looking at it just a few minutes ago. There was like a discussion in one of our on the Substack about what a feminist is and what it means, and it means a lot of things to a lot of people, but at that point it's kind of a useless label. Like I'm not sure what the purpose is of applying a label that means so many different things to so many different people. And it's hard really for me to pinpoint one particular thing and say this right here, this is true feminism.
I know. I mean, yes, my definition was deemed quaint. I think somebody said that. Maybe it was you that said that. I get that. I guess I still use it because, there was a period, everyone was using the word feminist in the 70s and into a lot of the 80s. But then there was a big period in the early 2000s where it was verboten. Like women were not using that term, and women who were very clearly benefiting from all the work of second wave feminism, absolutely just unequivocally the beneficiaries of all of that stuff, were refusing to use the word because they were just sort of chalking it up to an aesthetic. Like, well, I don't have hairy armpits and I am not a man hater, therefore I'm not a feminist. So I guess I always wanted to just keep using the word because I wanted to, like, make a statement that you don't have to be that way. Like it's just very clear. But yeah, I mean, I get it. It ultimately doesn't really matter. It's a semantic issue. Like it doesn't matter. I don't think.
Just doesn't. But I think the reason I continue to have a problem with it is because I'm not sure.